everybody. Welcome to another Creative University session. Hi, I'm Peter Csathy. I'm chairman of Creative Media and also of Creative University, co-founded with my wife, Louisa, and actually my kids, one of whom is in high school as a senior and one who is a junior at USC. And so this was made for all young people, Creative University. That's what it's all about. Another great session. Today's particular, well, first of all, it's a crazy day. Obviously, it's a crazy day. So got to say that. But today's session is going to be really interesting. We have people from Beirut. We have somebody from Puebla, Mexico. Obviously, some of you are going to be making your applications and sending those in for college and thinking of film school. I'm sure several of you are. And then there are a number of you who are in college already at film school, and those of you who are just interested. So just so you know, we'll get in with Chris very shortly. Great guest, great topic. Revolution, not evolution, what film school should teach you, but don't. Chris, welcome to Creative University. Great to have you.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to be with you today.
Yeah, and we're going to have a great topic, a very interesting topic. And Chris, you named it. You named the topic of revolution, not evolution, what film schools should be teaching, but don't. And we'll get into that. But first, I want to give everybody a little background of your amazing bio, because you're a very accomplished guy. So for everybody, this is a special treat. Chris is an Academy Award and Emmy-winning producer of film and television. He also teaches film at Chapman University and at UCLA Extension. So he has an insider's look at film schools. He creates innovative classes that prepare the next generation of storytellers. That's many of you. Chris is also an entrepreneur, though, and that's important. He's an entrepreneur and innovator who is deeply knowledgeable in the creative, financial, and physical production aspects of film, television, and new media. So that means he's built big teams of up to 150 and budgets reaching $50 million. He also manages a diverse set of projects inside and outside the studio system through his company, West Main Street Productions. And beyond all that, if that's not enough, some of his other current interests include artificial intelligence, creativity, of course, native language content, immersive storytelling. So that means virtual reality, augmented reality, 360, spherical capture, social impact entertainment, and streaming. So what that means is that Chris could be involved in multiple Creative University sessions, but we asked him to focus on this one today. So Chris, again, with that, welcome. And first, I want to ask you about that song, because everybody, I always ask my guests to pick a song before the session begins. So as you're holding, and he chose the song California by the great band U2. And I want to ask you why, Chris, why you chose that song.
Yeah, I chose that song, I think, Peter, because I heard it about a week ago, and it's a song that I've always loved, but it's a love song to California. And California certainly needs a little bit of love right now with the climate fires and how COVID is ravaging the state and all the change with the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, we all need a little bit of a love song from time to time. And I love that phrase in there with, after the darkness, the dawn will always come, and that's what we have to remember, particularly during this, which is a dark time, that the dawn will always come. And in that great refrain that, there is no end to love. All you need to know is that there's no end to love, and that love is what's going to carry us forward. And I really believe that, When I look back at my career and I look at projects that I chose out of love, or projects that I chose out of fear because I needed to do something or I needed to make money, the projects that I chose out of love really sustained me and were so much better. Because I think when we choose things out of love, it's so much better. It's much better than fear. If we can keep that in mind, it's a really, really great thing. I try to keep it in mind. I wish I could say I do it 100%, but we can all fall into fear, right?
Yeah, amen to all of that. It's great to have some positivity, because, and just for everybody, for the young people out there, the genesis of Creative University was that. It was to give inspiration, to hope, real opportunity, because we understand. We can't fully understand because we can't stand in your shoes, but at least intellectually we understand that you're faced with so many daunting things. So we want to do our little part to help. And Chris, thank you so much for being part of that. And I love your message of positivity there. And before we get into the specific topic, obviously your journey is a really interesting one. So it's very useful for people to understand when you first got interested in this business, in the film and television business, and how you went from that idea into actually getting into the business.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had always been involved in storytelling. You know, I grew up in an Irish family and my mother was a teacher, and, you know, education and storytelling were always really, really important in my house growing up. You know, I read a lot, I learned a lot, and we always told stories, and we would go on these great driving trips. We didn't go on exotic trips to faraway lands, but, you know, every summer we drove, you know, on trips with my family. I'm the youngest of five. So there was always great stories. And I think that's how I got interested initially. Started making films in high school, Super 8 films, and, you know, no sound, just sync, you know, just without sync storytelling with images. And that's how I really began, and then pursued an undergraduate degree at Loyola in New Orleans in philosophy and in film and television.
So let me ask you about, in high school, was there an actual film program, or no, not at all?
It was a kind of a film club. The high school I went to, you know, I grew up in Dallas. It was you know, and I think this is why I've always been interested in tech. I mean, Dallas was kind of a tech center then. You had Texas Instruments, you had Kodak had a big plant there. So people were kind of doing interesting things. You had the influence of, you know, Braniff Airways and design. And it was a very forward thinking city, I think. So I think that I got interested in film. I went to the USA Film Festival, you know, when I was probably 15 or 16 years old, and I saw a documentary, Arnold Schwarzenegger in Pumping Iron. And I just kind of caught the bug of telling visual stories.
Yeah. So it's just something that was always kind of in you, that kind of interest. And then you said, as an undergrad, you were also involved in that. Was it a formal degree program at the undergrad?
It was a degree program at Loyola University in New Orleans in television. Really, we you know, had television classes and did a local news broadcast. And Loyola University at the time owned the CBS affiliate in New Orleans, which was a pretty remarkable place for us to do internships and whatnot. It was the number one CBS affiliate in the country, with over a 50 share every night. So more people were watching that station than anything else on television combined. So there were a lot of resources available to us.
Got you. Okay, so then from there, what was the next part of your journey into the business?
Yeah, I worked in New Orleans at the CBS affiliate and at the PBS affiliate, and I kind of worked my way up until I was out, you know, shooting commercials and shooting documentaries and directing documentaries. And I did a couple documentaries that reached some kind of local success. And I decided I wanted to try to do things kind of on a national level. I was in my approaching my late 20s, and I decided to go to AFI. So I applied to the American Film Institute and decided that that's where I wanted to pursue a degree in producing. You know, when I went to AFI, the average age of our class was 31.
Yeah.
There was a lot of professionals who had gone into architecture and law and all different things, and then kind of came back to graduate school. So it was a great, rich environment. So I kind of finished my film education. I mean, I don't think you ever really finish when I was at AFI.
Okay, got you. And I want to go back a little bit. When
Sure.
you were first in from high school and then in college, did you know what part of the business you wanted to get into? Because then you got into, as you said, at AFI more on the producing side, but is that something you knew, or was it evolving over time based on the experiences that you had?
Yeah, I think it evolved over time, you know, and it evolved over what I saw, you know, working in television news. It's the news producers who run the newsroom, right? It's the news producers who schedule the crews and really kind of schedule the broadcast.
Mhm.
The news director decides what's going to be on the air. And I kind of knew I wanted to be that decision maker. I wanted to be the person putting together crews and sending them out to do stories. So I didn't know exactly. I mean, I didn't really know what a producer did in motion pictures.
Yeah.
I was coming from a news and a documentary, uh, world. And I knew what they did there, but I didn't really know in features until I went to AFI.
Okay, got you. And then when you were talking about AFI and you wanted to get into more on the national level, so take us through that and then ultimately, where you ended up, where you sit today, essentially, and the myriad things you work on, and then we'll get into more on the direct topic of the day.
Yeah, sure. So I went to AFI and I did a group degree in producing. Back then it was a 1-year program, and then they would invite 28 people back for a second year. So it was very, very competitive. It was a much smaller school then than it is now. And you would make a thesis film. So I produced a thesis film there, and then I knew kind of where I wanted to be. I wanted to be producing feature films and producing television. And I knew kind of the journey, how you did that. I knew that I should start in development. It was really pounded on me at AFI, the importance of writers and building relationships for writers. So I ran a nonprofit that worked with writers and had a great board of directors of some of the top writers in Hollywood. So I exposed myself to a lot of writers and built relationships. So that's kind of how I started in and just kind of went up that track, of working in development, then working, as a VP at a company in development, and then going out and starting my own company. But I bounced back and forth from working for other people and working for myself. And I must say, I always did projects, even if I was working for a company, I always did projects with friends or with other people, always trying to create. I've always been someone who has to be creating or telling stories.
Yeah. Well, and this is part of the passion that you were talking about. Again, I want to ask you one specific question about what you said. You were talking about at AFI, you started to work with some of the top writers in Hollywood. Now that sounds like that's not easy to do. So how were you able to make that happen?
Well, when I left, it was shortly after AFI, I began to run a nonprofit called the Humanitas Writers Prize, which was giving a cash prize. We're giving $150,000 to mainstream writers
I see.
who were entertaining and enriching the viewing public. So, an episode of ERs that dealt with some kind of abuse. I started a prize also when I was at Humanitas, a Sundance Prize. So Gina Prince Bythewood, who wrote and directed Love and Basketball, Patricia Cardoza, Real Women Have Curves, Tony Bowie, 3 Seasons, Nikki Caro for Whale Rider. So I just began to build these relationships and read. I mean, I was reading 400 or 500 scripts a year just to get a sense of story.
So is that something that, and then we'll continue on, but just on that point, reading scripts, how important do you believe that is? And just your advice to people who are out there and when they should start and all of that.
Yeah, I think you should start. Maybe I read too many bad scripts, but I think you should start reading scripts. I mean, when I started, it was hard to get a hold of scripts, but now online you can curate. There's really great stuff. I mean, there's show Bibles about how people went out and pitched. The Wire, the great HBO series, that show Bible is online. You can Google it. The New Girl Pitch is out there. So read those good examples of what worked in film and television.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Great
study
thought.
those.
Right. Exactly. You need to be exposed to many different things to start understanding what is good writing and effective writing, I would imagine, storytelling. Okay. So then maybe this is too much of a leap forward, but then you were doing your documentaries. winning Academy Awards, an Emmy Award too. So of course we got to touch upon that too.
Yeah, I mean, the Academy Award was shortly after film school. I had produced my first feature. I went to see a play in a black box theater, 3 actors. It was a great story. It was a story of a Japanese diplomat who wrote transit visas for Jews at the beginning of World War II. So Polish Jews were pushed up into Lithuania during the war. They got transit visas from a Japanese diplomat and then went across the Trans-Siberian Railroad down into Japan and ended up in the Shanghai ghetto. So I saw this in a black box theater, and one of the actors said to me, we're going to turn this into a short film. And I said, that's great. Yeah, you guys should go do that. It's really great. But I'm making features now. And I just said, I'm not really interested in getting involved. And she said, will you meet with the director? And I said, yeah, I'll meet with him and talk to him. And Chris Tashima came in, and he was so well prepared about how he was going to change this into a feature. And I could tell that he would be a great collaborator because he was open to ideas. And he had a plan and a vision of what he wanted to do. So I naturally signed on. And Chris and I built this incredible team of crew people and a big diverse. It was my first experience raising money, for a film. It was a short narrative film. I used to say that we spent $25,000, and I don't know if these numbers really matter anymore, but $25,000 on production, $25,000 on post-production, and then $25,000 on publicity. But it was a story that resonated with a lot of people, and it was one of those great gifts that Schindler's List gave to us. That Steven Spielberg film uncovered so many of these stories of rescuers. And
Yeah.
Chuchi Sugihara, the Japanese rescuer, was just a remarkable man. He wrote these transit visas even after the Japanese government said to stop. He was taken back to Japan, kicked out of the diplomatic corps, and sold light bulbs door to door.
Yeah, no, pretty incredible.
Incredible human being.
See, and that opportunity presented itself, and you seized it, even though it's kind of a lesson to everybody out there that that's not where your head was at the time. You were looking at doing features, not shorts, but you were open-minded. And so you sat down, you listened to it, and look at what happened because of it.
Right.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So then take us to the Emmy Award and how you got from, and I know we're skipping many different.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. Well, the Emmy Award was a film called Be Good, Smile, Pretty, and my assistant at the time, Tracy Tragos, who was a graduate of the USC writing program, she said, I was supposed to be writing, but I started Googling, and I came across an article about my dad, who died when I was 3 months old. And I said, tell me about it. So she came across an article on a swift boat pilot, which was during Vietnam, these boat pilots who went up and down the river. He died in an ambush. Tracy never knew him. John Kerry was a swift boat pilot, a lot of different people. But so I said to Tracy, well, what do you want to do? She goes, well, I want to try to tell this story. I want to learn more about my dad. And I said, well, I think you should go up to the Bay Area and ask your mom. Bring a camera and sit down and ask your mom to tell you about your dad. And that's what she did. She went up and sat down with her mom and said, can you tell me more about my dad? And her mom went out to the garage, pulled out this Foot Locker, and there was film and video, and not videotape, but film and audio recordings. Remember, we used to send cassettes to different people with music and stuff. And her mom had become an anti-war protester and kind of put this all aside. So Tracy spent the next year going around the country interviewing men who knew her dad. So she kind of built this picture of her dad through letters and through other people's memories. So something that gives me goosebumps just thinking about it is it's about love. What do you do when you have an idea like that? You just start. You don't wait for someone to give you the money. you get a camera and you go up and you sit down with your mom and you start talking about it.
Yeah. By the way, that's such a recurring theme in all the conversations I've had, where very few people know exactly where they're going to go, whether it's in their career. Like virtually nobody does. And even when you're telling a story, it's rare that somebody has it fully mapped out. And sometimes you just have to begin. You just
Right.
have to begin. But also, like, great stories are all around you. You know,
Right.
they're right.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting part of it too. So, by the way, there are a number of you asking questions, and I will get to them, I assure you. I'm going to just wait a little bit so we can get into the core. But I'm going over so many things, but you've done so many incredible things. But how did you then make teaching, bring that in? Because you're an entrepreneur, you're a filmmaker, you've been in television, and then you're an entrepreneur with your own business. But how did you bring teaching into your career?
You know, Peter, I always loved education. I didn't always love it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I grew to love it. You know, my mother was a teacher, as I said, and I was always trying to figure out how to learn more. And I love teaching. You know, I just decided I wanted to start teaching part-time and to give back. And that's when I was very early in my career. I taught at LNU and at AFI. And then I said, oh, I'm going to teach all the time when I'm not involved in a project. Fast forward, 20 years and I don't teach. And I mean, I gave workshops and I was involved in seminars and spoke at film festivals and whatnot, but I never really sat in a classroom until, 2 years ago again. And it's because it gives me so much. I mean, you had the artist Claro on, who has a huge following. I knew nothing about her until I started teaching again, when I asked kids what they were listening to. I knew nothing about the Dairy Girls on Netflix until I asked students. So it feeds me. It feeds my creativity to hear what other people are reading and watching,
Well, and also based on everything that you've done, that gets us to the topic that is provocative: revolution, not evolution. And so you were telling me a story yesterday that kind of kicks things off there,
Sure.
and it sets the tone about certain directors. So, as many of these people who are out there, and several of you who are in film school right now, but the role of film school, and whether it's how you feel about that in terms of those who want to make film and television their career in some kind of role. So kick us off.
Yeah, I mean, it's that question, and I'll pose it to the group. What do Christopher Nolan, Quentin Tarantino, Ava DuVernay, Jordan Peele, Catherine Bigelow, Stanley Kubrick, what do they all have in common? Anybody in the chat?
Anybody want to, in the chat? Anybody, or in the Q&A? What do all those great directors have in common? Come on, somebody. Okay.
So they didn't go to film school.
We have Rebecca says they do what they love.
They do what they love, and they didn't go to film school. But that doesn't mean that they didn't study film. So you don't have to go to film school, but you have to study film. And that's what you really have to figure out is, I see my role as a professor. Now I'm a curator. I point people to books. I point people to films. I point people to online content. I share my own content and what I'm doing. But there is so much stuff available online. I mean, when I started my career, I said I read a lot of scripts. I used to go to the Writers Guild library and check out things. Now you go to the internet and there you can find a ton of scripts. It's really, really great.
So when you say you're studying film, reading scripts like we were talking about before, but what are some of the other things that people can do right now, both whether they're in film school or not in film school?
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to write a comedy about, a particular person, what are those films? What other films have been done that are like that? What are some other examples? If you're writing a historical drama about a baseball player, what are those other films that are historical drama? and what worked in those films and what didn't work in those films. So it's research, you know, it's researching and uncovering as much as you can about how that story was told.
Okay, got you. Well, so I want to ask you the blunt question of, on your topic,
Sure.
what film school should teach you, but don't?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not advocating not going to film school, but I'm advocating of knowing what you want to get out of film school. So why are you going to film school? And you should know that. But I think some things that film schools aren't doing.
By the way, on that, I want to interrupt you on that. Sorry, but what is it that you want out of film school? Part of that is just understanding all the various roles that are involved in the film and television process. So you may think that you want to be a producer, or you may think you want to be a director, but part of it is just being exposed to all these different roles, because you may find out that you really love marketing, as an example, or right?
Right. I mean, that's a great, perfect point, Peter. I mean, you know, so many film schools, when you're 17, 18 years old, you got to decide if you're going to go in the directing program or the writing program or the cinematography program, when in reality, you may not know. I mean, I've got graduate students and upper division screenwriters who aren't really even sure they wanted to be a screenwriter. They just chose it. So I think film schools, look for film schools who let you change majors. Look for film schools who don't make you declare a major in your first year. So you can pick up a camera, you can sit in the editing room, you can do a lot of different things. I think some schools are beginning to change to that, where you're actually going to get hands-on experience. But I don't think at 17 and 18 years old, hell, at 30 years old, you don't really even have to know what you're going to do. But you just got to prepare yourself and look backwards. I knew I wanted to tell stories cinematically, and I needed to kind of figure out a roadmap how to get there. And it's never a straight road. You know, when I was in high school, I thought I wanted to be an FBI agent or a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I was kind of suppressing this creative side of me, I think.
Yeah.
And I went to Texas A&M University for a year, and I studied accounting with the idea that I would go to law school or become an FBI agent.
Right.
And I wanted that accounting background. And then I quickly changed to New Orleans, which offered a little bit more creativity and openness. But
yeah. And the industry has changed, as everybody knows, has changed so much, radically changed. And there's been, over the past several years, complete disruption in the media and entertainment world, where we're in a very much a streaming first world, which we all know, but it's also all the platforms, all the different devices, and creating stories for a mobile device is very different than creating a story for television, or, you know, on, and all the formats have been ripped away. So when you look at film schools, there was kind of the traditional curriculum, right? And how do you think film schools have evolved, because things have changed so rapidly? That gets to one of the things you were talking about, but and again, the evolution to where things you believe should be in terms of hands-on training, understanding. What are the gaps that you see with film schools?
yeah, I mean, I think some of the legacy film schools, like the legacy studios, when I say legacy, I think of, you know, Warner's or Universal or some of those older legacy studios, were slower in adapting. You know, it took Disney a while to launch their streaming. You know, HBO Max just launched, you know, Peacock just launched. Those legacy companies kind of went into streaming very slow. And I think that the great film schools are beginning to teach technology. You know, here's three things. Film schools don't teach you how to get a job or build a career. They don't teach you how to think differently, and they don't teach you about what's going on in the tech world. Those are my three main issues with film schools right now. They don't build your career, they don't teach you to think differently, and they don't teach you how to adapt to the tech world. If you don't adapt to the tech world, you're going to get so lost.
Yeah, completely agree. 1000%. That's so important for everybody out there, is that the business is so tech transformed right now, where the major tech companies have become media companies, and media companies are trying to become more tech savvy. So everything's coming together at the middle, and it's critical for everybody to, no matter what role you'd like to play in the business, in the media and entertainment, film, television business, to have a good, strong sense of technology. That's really important. I hear that all the time. Chris is emphasizing that too. I'm pretty deep in the overall business and work with a lot of the streaming companies, different players in the business. But that's why, like, doing these kinds of things, like listening to people like Chris, reading about this stuff, not promoting my book for that reason, but it's free for you because it gives you, the book that I mentioned, Viral Media, gives you a nice broad sense of media and technology in the different sectors, and learning the language, learning the vernacular is so important too. So you can have, enough where you can speak intelligently about it.
Right. Yeah, that's so true, Peter. I mean, if we could just talk about the tech world and what it can offer film schools, when you talk about things that are, data driven, how does data influence the decisions we make? Data driven and algorithms are great things, but they also take away from creativity, right? So if I'm on Spotify, it's going to tell me what I should be listening to. But if you're really going to be creative, you got to talk to other people, and you got to find your own, got to go outside those algorithms, right?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, everything comes from a story. Like,
Right.
to be effective, stories are at the core. But understanding, totally take your point about algorithms and such. But it's it's important for everybody out there to understand the role that they play in the business, because that there's all kinds of elements to it. But like algorithms as an example, and the way that some of these streaming companies program and choose the kind of programming to feed to you, not just how they feed it to you, but actually choose and package things together.
Right, absolutely. And just to continue on that tech thought for a minute, what are you doing to learn about virtual production? How do you manage a production that's in, you have production partners all over the world? What tools and techniques are you using? Are you using LiDAR to measure things? Are you using photogeometry? What are you using from the tech side to improve your productions? And film schools who have a good merging of technology, and I don't mean they have to have the latest cameras. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about they're teaching you methods of production that are being done now.
So, Chris, you mentioned those three things
Right.
that you feel are lacking from many of the film schools. And so, as an example, getting your first job.
Right.
And I've come across a number of young people who graduate from great film schools, and they're in that situation that you talked about. So if the film schools don't do a good job of doing that, how do you solve that problem as a young person out there who wants to be in the industry?
Well, I think it's your responsibility as well as it's the film school's responsibility. I believe in kind of a what I call a 50-50 method, 50% doing and 50% studying. So I think you should be doing internships, and those internships are the beginning of building relationships. It's not necessarily just networking, but it's building a creative community. And that creative community starts with your classmates and then extends to those internships, and I'll ask students, where did you do an internship last year? And they'll say, oh, I was at such and such a company or such and such a studio. And I say, well, are you still in contact with anyone there? No. And that's what you got to do. You got to stay in contact with those jobs, write a letter. I just saw where you just bought the title, you just bought this book, or you just won this award, or whatever it is. Write to them when you don't need something. Don't write to them when you need a job. Yeah. Write to them just to reach out. It's so transparent when someone comes to you and they need something and it's not reciprocal.
Yeah, no, that's everybody. It's so important. And that is absolutely a constant theme with all the speakers out there. Relationships are more important than just about anything. No matter where
Right.
technology takes you, it's the power of relationships. And so, and that's one of the core reasons why we created Creative University again, is that for those of you who want it, you will be establishing relationships, and a relationship that will help you cross over that velvet rope, get into the business. And as long as you do the things that Chris was talking about, where you are intellectually curious, you are committed for it to be a reciprocal kind of arrangement, that will serve you very well and will put you on your way. That's so critical. And so the internship, it doesn't have to be like a lengthy one. It could be a virtual internship, but showing that you really want it. So when you're working for somebody, you may think it may not be the perfect fit for you, but take it, get your foot in the door, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still in touch with probably every company I ever worked at least with one person from that company. And for film school, I mean, I'm still have strong relationships with the people I went to film school with 20 years ago. Not all of them, and I haven't worked with a lot of them, but you can pick up the phone and call them
Yeah.
and say, do you know so-and-so, or do you know about this new project? You can kind of share that information, and it's got
Okay.
to be
So
mutual.
we have a lot of questions and I'm going to get into them. But one thing I need
Sure.
to ask you, obviously everybody's sitting here and we're in the throes of, it's been really thrown into our face today as if it
Yeah.
weren't already, but with the pandemic and how it reaches the highest levels, right? So
Right.
nobody's immune. We're kind of locked down still. Schools are in disarray. So how do you believe, what do you believe the lasting impacts of this pandemic and COVID will be on film study?
Schools that don't adapt are going to get left behind. And when I say that don't adapt, I went to a conference this summer with film educators from all over the country, um, all over the country, and how they're adapting. And they've got to adapt in a lot of different ways. Got to figure out the cost of film schools. To go to a film school when you're going to end up in $40,000 in debt is a terrible thing. I have a big problem with the for-profit film schools like LA Film School and New York Film Academy. I think they prey on people to take student loans. I'm not talking about all film schools. I'm talking about the for-profit. I think there's a couple nonprofit models for film schools and online education that are out there that are going to affect film schools if they don't adapt with new programming.
Do you believe
Uh,
that online film schools can be effective?
I do believe online film schools can be effective, but I really, and more of a hybrid situation. I was talking about this with someone recently who's taking completely online film class from one of the big film schools, but it's asynchronous, so they're never in a classroom together. And they have no idea if anyone from their same city or zip code is even taking that class.
Yeah.
So the school's got to take that next step and build pods around the country of where people can interact and make things together.
By the way, on that point, you made me think of something, and then I'll start asking the questions. Where another part of Creative University isn't just about like having these sessions or even student-led sessions. If any of you are really interested in meeting other people who share the passion of what we're talking about, then reach out to us. The link for the deck is in there with the email addresses, and we can connect fellow students so that you can meet each other and perhaps collaborate, share ideas, just talk. So
Right.
that's
I mean,
another thing.
I've known Peter for about 3 months, and this is how I met him. I was doing some research on creativity for a class that I'm preparing, and his company popped up. And I just started going through his web. I reached out for more information, and we just began talking about this and talking about things we had in common.
Yeah, no, I loved it. You reached out very early on and appreciated. So,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to start getting into some of these questions. So feel free to send more, everybody. We have somebody who's anonymous, but what does a mentorship entail and what areas are the mentorships? I'll touch upon that really quickly. Go to the Creative University website. We have a number of people who are, people like Chris who we will try to match up with if you demonstrate This is the ask, demonstrating that you really want it, that you are willing to put in the time, that you're committed to it. And so we understand that, and we know who you are, so we can make that happen. What does it entail? It's very subjective. It's very personalized. It can be whatever you and the mentor want it to be. And so that's a little bit general, but it's the relationship more than anything. And it's like kind of giving to each other. Are there internships for everything in media? That's another question. And I'll say yes, there are a number of very diverse internships. So again, check out the companies that are on the website. All right, here's a specific question from Allison. Do you feel that it's important to have a film degree or formal film education on a resume? Is it even possible to get hired based on your resume cover letter in this industry, or do you always have to have a contact or prior relationship?
I think most people get hired because of relationships, right? Most of the jobs that I've gotten recently or most of the projects, I've found a specific need within a company. That's what I used to always do, is try to find a specific need that a company has and that you could fill and you could do for them.
Yeah.
Relationships are really important, but you can build those relationships. You can find an assistant. You can find someone. People who come from the tech world, I think can transfer in. I think anybody who's interested in movies, there's no one way to do this. So I wouldn't say there's any absolute way to do it, but I think relationships always help.
No question about it. And listen, this goes back to the themes in all these sessions, is that being an entrepreneur more than ever in everything you do. Being an entrepreneur, if you're a creator, you still need to be an entrepreneur to be intellectually curious about all these different changes in the business. And being an entrepreneur means being very scrappy and doing the work and taking the time right now, and maybe you have more time to do some research, what you're doing right now, just being part of this, you're already ahead of the curve. Because now if you take it to the next step, you can penetrate that. I'll give you one specific example, one that I love, where we had a session a couple months ago, or maybe a month ago, where there was a young woman who texted in anonymously saying that she had sent her resume in for a year and a half to scores of different companies, didn't even hear back, didn't even hear a response back. And so she wanted my guest, to take a look at her resume and say, what is she doing wrong? And so I took a look at the resume and asked her to send a video in of herself just so we understood her personality. And she's this amazing young woman, found out a little bit more who she is and what she wants, connected her to DreamWorks Animation. And now she has a paid internship at DreamWorks Animation. Like those are the kinds of things, because she was scrappy, because she reached up, because she asked the question. She wasn't too shy to ask the question.
Right.
Okay.
That's great.
Is there a kind of job that's just reading scripts?
Yeah, there's people who, there's professional script readers in LA, and there's book scouts, and there's people who, not only read scripts, but books and manuscripts. They're book scouts. There's also reading scripts to do coverage. Most universities have classes or at least workshops in doing coverage.
Can you define what coverage is?
Sure. So on a script comes into a production company, the CEO or the person in charge of development or the higher ups may not have time to read the volume. So they'll give it to an intern, they'll give it to a staff person to read it. And you tell the log line, you tell who the main characters are, you talk about the genre, and then you basically cover the script. You write a book report. It's writing a book report of the script. And you often have the time to either say pass or consider. And then you'll go into, usually people have development meetings once a week, and then you have to present the material that you read that week.
Yeah. So it's great. It's great experience.
Sure, absolutely.
Great experience, because it gets back to what you were saying, just reading too, right?
And your verbal and written skills get called on, right?
Yeah. And you're establishing a relationship.
Right.
So here's another one. How do you market yourself as a filmmaker if you like more than one thing, like editing, directing, writing, animation? Should one just concentrate on one job title or even genre, like documentaries versus animation?
That's a great question. And I think it's a very individual question. I would ask, what do you love most? And what are you best at? Early on in your career, you shouldn't focus on one thing. I mean, I switch between documentaries and narrative projects and for television and even features. So I've been fortunate in my career to kind of, I look at the material and the story first and then figure out where it fits.
Gotcha. Good. Rebecca, this is more of a comment than a question, but I want to read it because I think it's interesting. I think we should open up drive-through movie theaters again. By the way, they are opening up again. I know there's one down here in our parts around San Diego, at least one. I always loved going to them. I saw E.T. at the drive-through when I was a kid and will never forget that experience. The big screen shouldn't disappear just because the pandemic closed movie theaters. So just my 2 cents. That's what Rebecca says. And here's another question. As a new screenwriter in film school, what kinds of screenplays should I focus on writing? I have so many ideas. I hear various types of information, such as write something I could produce myself, or as in no big budget films. What would you recommend?
I would recommend writing. You've got to write every day. And it doesn't matter if it's a screenplay or if you're writing music or movie reviews for the student paper. I would write every day. As far as projects, I would write those huge, big projects that you're not the producer. You don't have to worry about how to pay for it. So create that epic world, but also create something that you can make with your friends. You know, I say write as much as you can, as often as you can. I mean, we think about jobs. You're not going to, I think there's going to be fewer and fewer jobs for people who write 90-minute screenplays, fewer and fewer. So what is the short content that you can write? You know, we think of streaming and we think of Netflix and Disney Plus, but really there's over 300 streamers looking for content. So what can you write for them?
And by the way, even on top of that, that's more in the longer form, but there's now the Band-Aid's been ripped off in terms of formats. It's
Sure.
anything you want it to be, essentially. And so you see it on that. You can have micro stories, bite-sized stories, and
Right.
you can have interactive stories,
Right.
immersive storytelling. So there's all kinds of different ways.
Yeah.
Okay, so Christina asks a provocative question. It sounds like paying hundreds of thousands of dollars on a film degree is not necessary, especially when we can do master classes and learn everything you talk about online. Can you expound on that?
Well, there's a lot that you learn in a film school and you build a network in the film school. So there's value in that. You're exposed to great teachers. If there's a particular director or a particular writing screenwriter that you want to study with at that university, that's great. So I think it's kind of both. I think degrees are really important. It may be a degree in economics if you want to go into the business of film, or it may be a degree in history if you want to do something else. I also am a big believer in graduate film school and maybe studying something else as an undergraduate.
How important, I'm going to ask a related question. How important do you think it is to have a quote unquote name film school, a brand?
That's a great question. I mean, I think some of those schools, I think of Northwestern, I think of Chapman, I think of AFI, they all have very strong alumni networks. USC, UCLA, NYU. I'm thinking of the big kind of legacy schools that have that. Yeah, I think it's helpful. I don't think it's the only way.
Do you think that the more important are relationships?
Relationships are 100 times more important.
Okay, so that gets into one of the questions here. What kind of internships are possible for filmmaking? And I'll touch upon it in my perspective, curious to get yours, obviously, that as Chris was saying, internships are valuable for all kinds of reasons. They expose you to different aspects of the business. You learn just by doing anything that's related to the business. And it may open your mind to possibilities you never even thought about, but they really do start your path down relationships too.
Right.
And which is the most critical, as Chris was saying. And what I would say, what kind of internships are possible are, it's myriad. You know, there's not one right kind. It could be involved on the production side, but you may be involved on the marketing side. You may be involved on doing coverage, you know, reading scripts. It could be all kinds of things. And at least my personal advice to everybody is, I wouldn't worry as much about the label of it. I would take opportunities and be scrappy. And then once you're in and starting to do something, demonstrate of how good you are, how passionate you are, and then you'll start getting the relationship that will go to bat for you to help you get to a place that is more interesting to you. But Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think internships are very important. I think the exposure and the experience you get at a film school is really great. You know, I'm more concerned with people leaving the industry with, you know, or leaving film school or college in general with $100,000 in debt. You know, if we can find other ways for people, I think film schools are doing a disservice of cranking out screenwriters who are entering the world with $100,000 in debt.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's right. And you're going to start seeing some of this change. I mean, you've seen it at the business schools, where some of the great lecturers at business schools are doing it all online now. There are certificate programs. Universities have to come up with creative ways to share their content, and it may not be a 4-year course.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things you were talking about, virtual production and remote production, is going to be increasingly important. We're at the hour. Do you have
Sure.
a few more minutes so we can answer a couple more questions?
Yeah, I'll do a few more minutes,
Okay.
certainly.
Abby asks,
But people should feel free to sign off if they've got to go.
yeah, of course. Nobody's signing off, though. I can tell you everybody stayed on because this is such a great topic. And you have such insights from being inside the business, but also teaching at great schools. So what's the best type of job for someone with project management experience in the film, television, entertainment industry?
What's the best job with project management?
Yeah.
I would say, you know, certainly film management, production management, studio facilities jobs, you know, where you're scheduling and, you know, building out studio space. I mean, yeah, that's two things that I think of right off the top of my head. I mean, every time I start a film or a TV project, it's like a startup, right? I go into a town. I'm usually one of the first people on the ground. And, you know, 4 weeks later, I have an office set up and, you know, 100 people working there.
Yeah.
So that's project management, right? Taking things from point A to point B. Post-production, if you're into scheduling, visual effects, I mean, talk about project management. If you're great at project management, if you can get into visual effects and you're coordinating visual effects that are being produced all over the world, there's no bigger project management job. I hope that answers your question.
No, that was great. And then Jacqueline Fisher wants to say, hi, Professor Donahue. So happy to attend and learn more from you. Nice to meet you, Peter. Great to meet you too, Jacqueline. Glad you're joined. Really enjoyed the session. Would love to apply in the future. Yes, apply. Take a look at the website. Carmine asked a question, and then this will be the last one, but for those of you who want to stay on, then I can answer more questions about Creative University or just anything about the business. I'll stay on extra. So Carmine asked, do you think treatments are helpful for developing, selling TV shows? What would you recommend a first-time writer include in a treatment versus a show Bible?
I would go online and search New Girl treatment. It's kind of a pitch document. that's online, or I would go online and read the pitch document for The Wire, or I would go online and read the pitch document for Stranger Things. That'll give you a sense. There's not, I mean, I always say that why this project, why now, why these writers, and why this network? Those four things, if you can answer those and put that in your pitch document, that's great. I mean, I'm seeing also more and more, we're turning to a visual world. I'm seeing more trailers, you know, people putting together teaser trailers without, you know, even shooting anything.
Yeah.
You know, and it started with book trailers. There's some of the cheesiest book trailers online. You got to do a little bit better than that, or fan trailers that are out there of different shows. So I think trailers are just as important to set the mood to go along with your treatment.
Okay, I want to ask you one question that popped into my head. If I were applying to film schools, you know, you have to submit your reel or your portfolio. So how important is that, and how should a young person who's applying to film schools think about that project? And what is yeah, I'll keep it open-ended. Like, what do you think schools are looking for? How should an applicant approach that?
Yeah, I don't really know much about that because I haven't been on the kind of the admission side, and I didn't realize that for undergraduates that was necessary. I was thinking that's more for graduate students, but I don't know. I would do something that's, you know, well crafted and well told, you know, and show your hunger. If you want to get into a writing program, you know, show that you've written more than, I don't know what Peter, it's hard for me to answer because I don't know what schools are looking for or what they're asking for.
I would imagine that just part of it, just like an essay, and I don't know what I'm talking about, but this is the way it goes to what you were saying. Approach your life with passion. So it's something authentic and something you're passionate about rather than thinking about what is expected of you.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So anyhow, and then the last question for you, and then I'll let you go, and then I'll stay on a little bit for anybody who wants to ask questions. Jacqueline also asked this question. What advice do you have for students graduating during the pandemic?
That's a great question, Jacqueline. I think that you should, if you're graduating in May, you should be reaching out right now to every place you've ever had an internship. You should ask people you know who have worked at different companies, and you should reach out to other alum from your university. People can do chats now on the pandemic. You have access to more people now than possibly you ever had. So, you know, build a good LinkedIn profile and begin making connections now, not in May.
Great. So thank you, Chris. That was outstanding. Really appreciate your time. And like I said, everybody, Chris was one of the first to reach out when he learned about Creative University and just was generous with his time, offered to help any way he could. So many things we could talk about, but by the responses I'm getting, people are getting a lot out of it. Bill Gasu, I'll answer your question about internships, but thanks so much, Chris. It's great to
Peter,
have you.
Can I leave you with one quick story?
Yes, of course.
You know, everything for me is about passion and doing things that you love, do things out of love and not fear. And I always remember that story growing up as a kid, the Velveteen Rabbit. And I don't know, people who may not remember the story, but the Velveteen Rabbit, the little boy loves his toys so much that the toys come to life at night, right? And they move around the room based on this kid's love. But I thought about it when I was really young. I was thinking, it's not the toys that come alive. When you truly, really love something, it's you that comes alive. And that's how you have to approach your work and your love, you know, whatever you do. If you really love something, it's going to give you life.
See, what a great way to end it. That's awesome. I love that. That's a great story, Chris. That makes a good professor. That makes a good teacher right there. It inspires people to want to engage, and that's what it's all about.
Thank you, Peter. It was great spending time with you and with your guests online. And of course, reach out to me with anything that you need and anything that I can do.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris.
Bye-bye. Have a great week.
Thanks.